In these first couple problems in section 11.3, we're not asked to find the solutions to the equation. We're just asked to find what kind of solutions they are and how many they are. And in order to do that, we don't need the full quadratic formula. We just need the part in the square root, which is referred to as the discriminant. So we do the calculation b squared minus 4ac. B squared is 16 minus 4 times a times c. A times c is 6. This is 16 minus 24. This is negative 8. When you have a negative number for the discriminant, it means that in the quadratic formula, this part in here is going to be a negative number, which means you have the square root of a negative number, which means they're imaginary. So the fact that this is negative 8 tells you you're going to have two imaginary numbers. Why two of them? Well, because you have plus this and you have minus this, so that'll give you two of them. I suppose on this problem I ought to do a b squared minus 4ac, find the discriminant, and let me know what that means. But I am tempted to do something else. I'm tempted to think that this is a perfect square, so I think it's 3t and 3t, and I think it's minus 8 and minus 8. And if that's the case, and I'm checking it right now, and it is the case, then we're going to have one rational solution. How do I know that? Well, because I know what it is. It's going to be 8/3. So here it was just basically easiest to solve it. If you try to do a b squared minus 4ac, you are going to get negative 48 squared minus 4 times a times c, which is 9 times 64. At this point, you should probably grab a calculator and check this out. I didn't have a calculator handy, and I didn't feel like doing multiplication. So I messed around with the 48 times the 48 on this side and did some factoring and got them to both be equal so that I know that the subtraction is 0. That means in the quadratic formula, this thing inside the square root is 0, which means we're adding 0 and subtracting 0, which is the same thing, which means we're getting one solution. In this case, it's a rational number. And so we have one rational number. But we knew it was 8/3 because when factoring works to solve a quadratic, factoring is the thing to do pretty clearly. In math, sometimes you're asked to do stuff forwards and backwards so that you can literally know how to do things forwards and backwards. So here we're given the solutions and we're asked to find the quadratic equation that has these solutions, and the best thing to do is to kind of undo the factoring method. So if we have an x plus 1 factor and an x plus 3 factor multiplied together equaling 0, then by the zero product property, we know x equals negative 1 makes this 0, and x equals negative 3 makes this 0. So these are the two numbers that will be the solutions to this equation, and now all we need to do is multiply it out. Using FOIL or whatever, x squared plus 3x plus 1x, that's 4x, plus 3 equals 0. When we have an equation, we're done. Here we need a quadratic equation that has a natural number and a fraction for a solution. So let's try the same sort of thing we tried on the last problem. We're going to have our x minus 5 because 5 makes that 0. We're going to have our x minus 3/4 because 3/4 makes this 0. Now the book says to multiply this out and then later try to get rid of the fractions, but I want to point out something. I'd really like an extra factor of 4 to be distributed through this piece right here, and so I simply multiply both sides of this equation by 4. We can do that anytime we want. Notice I multiplied this by 4 and got 0. Now when you're multiplying three numbers, you can multiply them in any order. You certainly don't distribute this to each of these. That's not how you multiply three numbers. So I'm going to leave this one alone, and I'm going to distribute the 4 through this one. That's why I put the 4 down in the first place, is so that I could multiply through by 4. The book has you doing this later, which is okay, but I like this better. Notice 3 4s makes this 0, and 5 makes this 0. We're well on our way to winning this game. We got 4x squared here. We've got minus 3x minus 20x. That's minus 23x's. And we got plus 15 equals 0. Here's a quadratic equation that will have these two numbers as solutions.